My name is Angeli, and I'm voting from West Virginia.
Hi, my name is Rachel. I'm the president of Democrats Abroad at McGill, and I'm from the great sunny state of Florida.
My name is Nathan, and I'm voting in Texas.
Hi, my name is Maddie, and I'm voting in Connecticut.
I think that the biggest thing for me is the fact that, obviously, you'd have to be crazy to not know this, we're going through a worldwide pandemic. And one of the countries that's been hit the hardest anywhere in the world is the States. So to me, it's really important to have an administration that understands the virus better and is willing to listen to more experts about it to try to calm it down and bring our levels down to like a not more sustainable level to end the coronavirus in the United States.
It's actually my first general election voting as a citizen. I actually just became naturalized this summer, so it would have already been quite memorable for me. But I think with the high stakes, obviously politically, of the general election, but also with COVID, it's a bit sad in many ways, and it's conflicting feelings about everything. But I know I will not forget this, and it's I want to make an impact. So I'm glad I voted.
Some of the most important issues for me, which this election represents, is climate change. For me, this really is a kind of black or white decision. With Biden, it's a much more optimistic hope forward for action on climate change. But not only is the environment something at stake for this election, but there's also the rights of lots of minorities, the LGBT community, women, people of color, immigrants. This entirely is all up at the ballot for this election. And so this election is extremely consequential, not just for me, but for so many people within the US who are maybe in less privileged positions.
For me personally, the election has been something that I've anticipated since seeing Donald Trump elected in grade 10 as a 14-year-old. As a dual citizen, I wasn't able to vote last year in the Canadian federal election due to my age, but this is the first year I'm eligible as an 18-year-old, so it's kind of a coming of age moment for me. It's hard to give an answer that's not related to COVID-19, obviously, but I do think that a lot of the issues will come from economic reform following COVID-19.
The economic impacts of the pandemic are still, I think, the defining issue, but clearly the pandemic has just simply exacerbated and, I'd say, accelerated a lot of underlying issues within the country that have kind of been brought right to the forefront.
The defining issue, in my point of view, has unfortunately become COVID-19. So while that is a defining policy issue, I think it is quite frustrating for me personally, because I do really think that climate change should be a pressing issue that is a kind of defining issue of this election. That is a really kind of life or death thing that we're going to be dealing with and seeing the consequences of in the future.
I would say that, yeah, the coronavirus is the biggest one. Obviously, there's a lot of other things on the table. The aging justices of the Supreme Court is one of them. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg recently passed away, and obviously there's a very high chance many of the other justices besides the last two that were appointed have been sitting on the court for many, many years. So whoever the next president is will probably still get to decide who like the next one or two justices will be. They've been talking about potentially trying to overturn really, really important cases like Obergefell v. Hodges, which obviously want to keep around Roe v. Wade as well. So that's another reason this election is very important. I was very, very lucky. Obviously, living in Florida, you always hear a lot of jokes about being the worst possible state for elections at all. But for me, it was very, very easy. I got my ballot, I think, 3 weeks to a month ago, filled it in, sent it in, and got a notification from my local elections office that they received it and counted it and everything was good. So I was very lucky with how easy it is. I know that for a lot of people, it's not the case. And I've been trying to use my platform as president of Dems Abroad to try to help as many people get their ballots as possible and understand the process.
I casted my ballot online. I'm luckily voting from a state which enables us to submit our ballot through a web form online, so I haven't had to deal with envelopes or mailing or postage or any of those things that no one uses frequently anymore. It was a very complex process that I didn't expect, because although I didn't vote in Canada's election, I worked as a poll worker, and it was incredibly easy for people to cast their vote in the Canadian federal election. but because each state has their own requirements, the voting process was definitely obscure in a way I hadn't anticipated. Yeah, luckily I was able to figure it out, but it definitely wasn't an easy process.
So I already cast my ballot. I mailed absentee, but luckily I mailed it off, I think, well enough ahead. No matter how long the postage would take, it would get there. And I checked the other day through the Texas Secretary of State's website, and my ballot had been received. So, hopefully, fingers crossed, it all goes through. Feel good that I already kind of have that out of the way. And experience, it is complicated. I had to do a lot of research while I was preparing it to make sure I folded things right and I signed on the right line, or, I printed a certain piece off correctly and whatnot. I'm glad I did it, well ahead of time, because that would have been even more stressful. There's a lot of barriers to do it, but if you give yourself ample time, you can figure it out.
I've personally had a positive experience with voting, but it is frustrating knowing that every state's laws and policies differ to such an extreme extent. I've had friends who are able to just simply mail in their ballot just over email, which is obviously much more reliable than just sending it through the mail. And so it can be frustrating, but it's definitely important, I found, to get through the process well and ahead of time so you know that your vote is cast.
So honestly, I'd be a little bit scared to say that I'm feeling optimistic, because in 2016, if you had asked me, a day or two before the election how I was feeling, I would say completely optimistic. If you'd asked me a couple of hours into the election, I would have said that I was feeling optimistic. But at the same time, polls are showing much, much stronger this year favorably towards Democrats than they were in 2016. Even if the presidential election doesn't go as we kind of hope it will, we see polls showing in many states that are traditionally really, really hard red. We're seeing polls showing that they might be switching to blue. For example, Georgia has seen a massive Democratic upsurge, Texas and Arizona as well.
I'm feeling pretty pessimistic, honestly, regardless of the outcome of the presidential election. In terms of the presidential candidates, neither one of them to me have track records that really proven to me the right instincts, and that neither have put forth an inspiring platform.
Feeling cautiously optimistic. In 2016, a lot of us had an expectation that did not come to realize. I think that this year, many of my peers and myself as well are taking it more seriously than we ever would have before. So that following, I'm cautiously optimistic about the results.
I don't really want to have an optimistic outlook, as bad as that sounds, just because I was fully blown away in 2016 when I was entirely optimistic that it would be Hillary Clinton winning. I definitely would love the outcome to be in Joe Biden's favor. However, just the state of America is always so difficult to really predict. Like you see with reactions to protest movements, you see responses to the pandemic and refusals to follow social distancing, and you see climate change deniers. There's a lot within the American population that makes me a bit pessimistic. But yeah.
The polls right now are saying Biden. I personally voted for Biden as well, and I do think that will be the outcome of the election.
Joe Biden is ahead in a lot of polls, but again, I really don't want to put too much hope upon those polls. When it comes down to it, it really obviously comes down to those crucial swing states, and I do know that Biden has been campaigning very heavily in a lot of those. I really think it's 50-50, and I personally don't know who will win, and I don't think anyone will really know for sure until every last ballot is counted.
Biden has held steady. Trump has made tiny inroads, I think, in the past couple weeks in a couple of the polls, but nothing significant. So I think Biden will win. Everyone's skeptical of polling in post-2016 with what happened with Hillary Clinton and the discrepancies between the polling and the actual results. But even with kind of the margins in the discrepancies of the polls and actual results, Biden would still be ahead in, important states like Pennsylvania and Michigan. So anything can happen. I think these days it's almost always the more ridiculous thing happens, the most uncertainty always prevails, it seems. But if I was a betting man, I would say Biden does win.
Knocking on wood and keeping my fingers crossed that it's not going to be Donald Trump again, because the last 4 years have been very clearly a disaster, very dangerous for a lot of people, especially with the pandemic going on. So hopefully we could get an administration that's willing to coalition build and exercise more restraint.